Filipino Music Performance Traditions, recalling, retrieving, and reinvigorating the intangibles of our fading cultural memory. Renato B. Lucas, your resource speaker. A nation without a memory is a nation without a soul. This declaration may seem self-explanatory. However, its true meaning poses more questions than answers. In this day of age, when the meaning of progress has been diluted, a nation's memory cannot be put aside, and in the worst of scenarios, forgotten. Madali raw tayong makakalimot. First of the three R's, recall or recalling, music of the present, particularly performances, is just the tip of the iceberg of layers of our living traditions. I am utilizing the word tradition here in a generic sense rather than in a musicological sense. The so-called performances by Filipino musician artists through the ages of music in the formal setting, the stage. Music as heard in various functions, for example in schools, church worship, child play, etc., especially of that of which we grew up with, is the most powerful reminder of our individual and communal memory. We might not remember exactly what we heard, but we recall many associations with these experiences of singing, playing, listening, dancing, moving, and the like. It is not just the joy that is ingrained in our so-called subconscious, yung ating alaala, to use modern-day millennial and Gen Z parlance, hugot. With the consolation of our individual memories through time and space, it becomes our communal memory. However, communal memory usually manifests itself through, for lack of a better word, triggers. We are reminded in what we see, what we hear, even tastes, our senses. Remember when we have gatherings and we eat some Filipino food, it reminds us, it brings us much memories, Or we see pictures, especially of our friends who we have not seen for a long time, our close relatives who have passed through this world. With the avalanche of music brought about since the advent of the digital age, it is very easy to be buried with all the music available. Especially with the current pandemic lockdown, would the live performances be disseminated? With certainty, or perhaps prejudice, because I am a musician myself, this could or rather should not happen. Hindi natin dapat payagan mangyari ito. I have prepared here a picture of Metropolitan Theater, the one before and after. Heritage pictures, recordings, videos might not be that strong a trigger for recall. Witnessing or passing by an actual architectural landmark, experiencing a live performance herein is enough to stimulate us to ask questions. Upon seeing the actual heritage structure, experiencing a performance would certainly arouse our curiosity, stimulated towards an imagery, an imagined imagery within us, perhaps, most likely. The Metropolitan Theater, for instance, is more than just an impressive structure. It was witness to many events. Events is such a weak word for the many performances held there. not counting historical events that transpired inside and within the theater. I remember passing by the theater while it was being renovated on the way to the university and going back home. The National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCCA, which is the institution that managed to salvage the landmark structure from total decay, mounted around the building construction fences, pictures of performances, pictures of performers, pictures in general, that transpired at the Met. Since its inception, it was quite eye-catching. Mapapalingon ka talaga dun sa mga malalaking larawan. Moreover, there were so many students when NCCA called for volunteer to clean up the building. So many students volunteered for the cleanup drive of the then decrepit building. Public moral support for its rehabilitation was overwhelming. The media was all around. It was not a circus, but what does this show? A thirst to retrieve forgotten memories, perhaps. The narrative of how many attempts there were in restoring the theater is another long story. I think there are about twice or three times. It was restored in the 70s and then it closed again. Personally, just passing by the building triggers in me a lot of memories, being a young musician myself, who was privileged to have performed in this venerable place, along with countless Filipino as well as foreign artists. I still concertize as a concert cellist and conductor, although retired from the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra, with all humility. Together with many of us, I'm sure, the reopening of the Metropolitan Theater is very much anticipated. I initially thought of an informal title for this project that goes like, quote-unquote, hearing loss, echoing our fading cultural memory, end of quote. In this metaphorical context, how can we amplify our loss of hearing? I am proposing a business model called VMOS, very familiar in business. Vision, mission, objective, and strategies. The vision or the dream is building a quote-unquote museum of the imagination of the Filipino music. First, real, as in the structure of itself, and virtual, as in the endless possibilities of its content, especially that of live performances. Metropolitan Theater is much more than an architectural landmark, with emphasis. What matters most is what transpires with and in the venue. To my knowledge, we do not have a repository, for lack of a better word, of our ever-dynamic performance history. We have concert venues, we have many written chronicles. What is lacking, perhaps, is connecting the disconnect within the images, the representations, the chronicles of what transpired and hopefully continue to transpire, and attaching them to what is left of the memory of this continuing saga. Objective, or reason for existence of this museum. I'm going to reintroduce the big word humanism. This reminded me of a very precise German word, Geisteswissenschaft, roughly translated in English as the science of the human spirit. Pero mas madali itong maintindihan sa wikang Pilipino. Ito ang kaluluwa ng ating pagkatao. Consolidating the Gestalt, another German word, in Filipino o kabuuan of the Filipinos musico-cultural tapestry. Again in Filipino, ating kalinangan sa musika. Objective of VMOS: reawakening in terms of cultural literacy, especially through and with the incoming digital post-pandemic new reality. Again, in Filipino, kamulatan sa ating kalinangan. Our culture is so rich, enriched by a tapestry of appropriations from that of our own. Hindi gaya-gaya, kung hindi pagsanib ng mga bagay-bagay na ikayayabong ng ating kultura, ng ating musika. I have introduced a slide here, that of Film Life Auditorium. This is to contrast the success of the rehabilitation of Metropolitan Theater to the tragedy of this auditorium, the Film Life. Ito malamang ang resulta ng pagkalimot sa alaala, kapabayaan, pagwawalang bahala. Pag manumbalik ang alaala, ay magkakaroon ng panibagong estratehiya. Ilang estruktura na ang giniba gawa tila ng kamangmangan o kaya ng karamutan, selfishness. The only consolation, perhaps, is that even though the auditorium was demolished, the memory persists. Here is a photo personally uploaded by Cecile Licad, the internationally renowned Filipino concert pianist. Here, memory is so vividly demonstrated in this photo when she was still rather tiny, or rather a very, very young kid performing in this huge auditorium. Unfortunately, lessons continue not to be learned. Demolitions persists without consideration to the sensibilities of people. Retrieval strategies, building and rebuilding, like what NRCP, Musika Pilipinas Project, na ang layunin ay tipunin ang watak-watak na alaala. Makikita natin dito ang Eraserheads at isa pang larawan ng isang konsyerto sa Cultural Center of the Philippines. Magmamalaki lang po ako. Ako po yung tumutugtog dun sa isang larawan na yon, yung cellista, the soloist. Tulad ng mga intangibles na tinatawag, written music scores, mga piyesa, may mga nota. They are tangible, nakikita natin sila, but dormant. Hindi natin sila maririnig hanggang hindi sila tinugtog. They are static until played. Ano pa yung hahanapin natin? Electronic storages, analog or digital. They are available. Hahanapin. Mahirap siya hanapin. Kung makita man, napakalimitado ng access. Orality, yung mga pinagpasa-pasa through the ages. These are vessels of transmission of our history and heritage, ang pamana ng lahi. Hindi ganun kadami pala ang mga kwento tungkol sa kasaysayan ng ating mga musikero. Ano ito? Mga Filipino Music Performances? Iba't iba, samot-samot. The diverse stage and canned performances by Filipino, including popular and mixed media. By mixed media, I meant here music that are incorporated in film and in theater. In diverse materials from the indigenous, the folk expressions, to classical, Filipino or otherwise, Filipino classical or non-Filipino classical music. The performance genres are numerous, countless. The performers are likewise numerous. The ongoing Musika Pilipinas project, a project of the National Research Council of the Philippines, although seemingly ambitious, is doable and sustainable even after the project is done. In reality, the project could be considered done, but the efforts should be perpetuating. Heritage preservation should not be an end in itself, but rather a means, not just for cultural enrichment, but for economic benefit as well. Our creative industry, special mention, the music creative industry, is rather an under-tapped resource. Human resources with bountiful creative energies embodying a huge potential contributing to the national economy. Museum, not museumize. I've introduced two pictures here. These buildings existed like the Manila Grand Opera House. Ngayon, hotel na lang siya, yung Manila Grand Opera House na dun sa kanto ng Claro M. Recto sa katabi ng LRT station, Rizal Avenue, Recto Station. But these buildings, like the Cultural Center of the Philippines, cannot continue to exist if the performing arts, particularly the Filipino music traditions, are, inventing a word, museumized. These structures were and are museums of expressions. Filipino performance media are made dynamic. Laging buhay, umuusbong, yumayabong. How could dynamism be incorporated in the Museum of Filipino Music Performance Art and not museumized? One way perhaps is introducing the familiar materials towards the not so familiar, including the classical. For example, the national anthem. Napakaganda ng kwento ng ating lupang hinirang. Tuwing inaawit natin ito, sana hindi lang tayo parang parot na hindi natin sinasaloob. Malalaman natin ito pag malaman natin ang naratibo. Nakapaloob sa ating anthem ang napakahabang kasaysayan ng ating lahi. Filipino opera, hindi man siya ganun kapamilyar dahil hindi siya ganun kadami. Pero the contemporary musical theater ay pamilyar. Ano pa ang hindi pamilyar? Sarsuela. Maraming proyekto ngayon ng Filipino Musical Theater na binubuhay ang sarsuela. Bagong luma, lumang binago, o bagong niluma. Just a play of words of the endless possibilities. We have many significant popular figures. I encountered the late Francis Magalona, who left a significant mark in the appropriation of hip-hop culture. I saw him in a lot of popular music readings. Of course, who does not know the popular Broadway singer Lea Salonga and the equally famous Cecil Licad. These are our channels for internationalization. They are globalized, to name a few. But we also have lesser known, some of them are session musicians, but significant artists like Toti Fuentes, the wild man of the piano, Bobby Enriquez, if I hope I had his name right. We also have almost forgotten luminaries like Katie de la Cruz, who was revived with the Brian Cayabyab musical Katie, in the national artist Ryan Cayabyab is instrumental in this. There is another equally luminary, Priscilla Aristorenas. I remember my late father. She's called the Colinus girl. I think Colinus is a brand of a toothpaste then. Ani Brazil, another fantastic jazz singer. A reference here is that he is Richard Merck's mother. Of course, who does not recognize Nora Honor, not just in the field of music, but in the field of cinema. The list could go on. Of course, I'm prejudiced. I have to mention classical Filipino musicians like Jovita Fuentes, the late Oscar Yatco, who was the music director of the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra, Evelyn Mandak, Cecil Licad, who I mentioned earlier, The now ever-present Arthur Spirito, who's making waves in opera houses in Europe and in the United States. Not mentioned here are the countless musicians that have traversed our music history. Building archives that are accessible is very, very important. In much of my research, I have encountered music scores in various venues, especially the University of the Philippines College of Music Library. It's a rich archive of scores, especially written by Filipino composers, a rich archive of narratives in it. Yeah. And there are many private collections. For example, that of the collectibles of the late Vera Cruz, Nestor Vera Cruz. Going to the next one, electronic archives, audio and video performances of great performances. Another component, a music component in films. The alternative cinema continues to make waves, even in today's pandemic. Surmounting the challenges is great because of the degradation of the materials. Another item will be performances, whether they are real or virtual, especially considering the wide reach of the virtual mode. Filipino popular music continued to explode despite or perhaps because of the lockdown. Lastly, and as important, is the support system, the public and private partnership in the creative industry of music. Music does not exist in a vacuum, not static but dynamic, with emphasis. Reinvigorate in capital letters. Music performance traditions needs nurturing with a support system from all sectors for sustainability. There are already countless efforts at legislation, for example, to this end. To name other existing efforts, there are analog and digital audio collections of Ayala Museum, Lopez Museum, Film Development Council of the Philippines, Cultural Center of the Philippines, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and similar institutions. There are countless performing groups, especially choirs, that have garnered international acclaim and recognition. Public television and cable television, like digital streaming service, etc., 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 plays a vital role too. Virtual presence in the digital space, especially with the pandemic and the much anticipated post-pandemic implication or scenario, with optimism, of course. What else can be done? Enriching the humanities programs of colleges and universities, as well as an expanded content in primary and secondary education, which goes beyond appreciation, experiential rather than stock knowledge. Hindi lang siya nakasulat sa mga textbook, mahirap marinig ang mga salita, ang mga kwento. Much of all that was mentioned are chronicle. However, reading chronicles about music is always found wanting. Sa madaling salita, for short, nothing beats experiencing music. Orchestrating all these efforts must be the key. Why? Recall, retrieve, and invigorate the intangibles of our performance traditions. From memories, we sing what we aspire. We build what we dream of. And we rebuild our nation. We strengthen our values, our Filipino values. Lastly, borrowing from Benjamin Curtis, emphasizing the sense of belonging in nation building through the expressions through music. Music makes the nation.